Welcome back to the DVD Clutter Podcast, the podcast where a married couple goes through their collection one DVD at a time to determine what stays and what goes. On today's episode, this is part one of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, the 1966 spaghetti western classic directed by Sergio Leone and starring Clint Eastwood.
The good. The bad. The ugly. The Civil War.
So, Mattie, tell me how your relationship to the good and the bad and the ugly began.
So, I think it probably started through my obsession in high school and college with the work of Quentin Tarantino. There's a lot of reflections of this film in it, and it was sort of a way into a lot of classic films, Pulp Fiction and Kill Bill and all of those. And this was the one that, out of all of the ones that I discovered that way, that really stood out for me. This was the one where it was like, just the scale of it, simultaneously being so big and sprawling and epic, but also kind of so tacky and cheap in a way, and the fact that it balances all of these elements and doesn't really hurt for any of it. Like the tackiness works, the cheapness works, the graininess of the film and the kind of DIY nature of the titles, and it's got also one of the best scores, and it's just kind of weird. Like the landscapes look weird. They don't look like any other Western because it was shot in Europe. Mm-hmm. It kind of gives it this like very mythic sense. And watching the first half this time, we are splitting this episode up into two. Watching the first half this time, I think all that really holds up, and I've really enjoyed the characters as much as they are terrible, terrible, terrible people in a way that is very entertaining to watch them interact and watch them sort of exist in the world around them. What did you think?
Yeah, so actually this is the second time I've seen this. Let me rescind my previous declaration on the last episode. I have indeed seen a Clint Eastwood movie before. In fact, I have seen several Clint Eastwood movies, as I discovered after we recorded that episode. I have seen The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly one time before because you showed it to me many years ago. And I have seen a couple movies that he has directed. So this is really the only classic of his movies that I've seen. Except for Play Misty for me. I guess we could count that one. But, as far as his Westerns go, this is the only one I've seen. And, I have to say, watching it a second time, I'm having fun with it. Like, I was kind of commenting to you how many parallels to gangster movies I can kind of see in this. And I'm not a Western lover at all. I would say that that's probably one of my least.
How many Westerns have you seen, and what are some of the other ones that you're sort of bringing to the table at this point?
I would say, I feel like in college and film class we watched some really, really old ones. I don't even know what the names of those probably are, but they're like the really, really old studio Westerns. It's just, it's not my thing. I'm not super into it. But what I recall from the first time watching this too is how much I get really engrossed in, the story and how terrible the characters are and just how they're constantly double crossing each other. It's interesting too because, the movie's called The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And it's like, we've determined that for some reason, the white blonde guy is the good guy in all of this.
He's not even really blonde. He's got brown hair.
It's like questionable, but, everybody is kind of terrible and out for themselves. It should be called
The Bad, and the Bad. They are all terrible people. And certainly the score is just so enjoyable. It makes the movie for me. It's one of the most recognizable film scores, and just all of the little nuances of it, like the way that it just sort of, it's so playful in the way that it depicts characters, and I just think it's like so much fun. Maybe one of the first examples that we have of a score being so incredibly famous like that. I don't know, what do you think? Like, it's so iconic. I mean, I would definitely say that there are other film scores that predate it that have been like huge hits in and of themselves. The one that leaps to mind for me is The Third Man. So, first of all, a little bit of context for our viewers. We watched the first half of the film, which basically has extended sequences that introduce each of the main characters. You have Tuco, who is this bandit with a huge bounty on his head. We come to learn that he's also a serial rapist. And there are some kind of interesting racial dynamics tied up in that, which we might return to. There is Angel Eyes, played by Lee Van Cleef, who is this hitman who is, in the course of his work, discovers that there's some cash box, a box filled with gold somewhere out there, and he's going to find it. And he's tracking down, it's almost like a detective story for him.
Yeah, Angel Eyes is my man. He's
Yeah.
my fave. He's my fave so
He's
far.
got the great mustache.
Yeah.
And then you've got the good Blondie, the Clint Eastwood character, and he's like this kind of con man. He's like a con artist. He teams up with these folks who have big bounties on their head, and that's how he comes to meet Tuco, who's the ugly. And his whole thing is he turns them in, takes the money, frees them on, during their execution, and then the two of them run off and split the money.
Yeah, he's like a bounty flipper. He's
Yeah.
like...
And I love how, like, I love movies with process, and I feel like that really comes through here. I'm kind of interested to know, like, because I don't really know, like, when the telegram really got going, so I don't know how realistic it is that all of these U.S. Marshals don't wise up to this scam earlier.
Well, I guess it's also set during the Civil War.
It is set during the Civil War.
That's
So that's
kind
the
of going
1860s.
on. They're a little preoccupied.
What's your thought of how this treats the Civil War?
It's interesting because it's such a background thing in this movie, but I'm not really sure. There's the one character who he kind of makes a little bit of a statement about the war, about how I think he wants the North to win. He wants the Yankees to win.
He's the tavern owner. Mm-hmm. He's happy to see the South leave because the Yankees are better funded.
Yeah.
And 5 minutes later, as the South is retreating, the Yankees bomb his tavern. And
yeah.
So that's kind of like a little sly joke to, I guess, about like war profiteers. It's interesting sort of saying stuff like that and thinking about it in terms of Sergio Leone probably would have grown up during World War II and during during fascist Italy. And I agree with you where it's just this background, it's just this setting. Everything that happens in the war, like that's kind of, the deal with the cash box is tied up in that, and it's in this war cemetery. We haven't quite gotten there yet, but where we left off is Tuco, who was taking revenge on Blondie, finds the name of the cemetery. Blondie finds the name of the grave, and once again they need each other and have to partner up again.
Yeah.
And we'll return next time. But the way that, like, the war and the battles and all of this stuff, it's just an inconvenience to them.
Yeah, it's there's a scene where I believe it's Angel Eyes is talking to I think they're Confederate.
Yeah, they're Confederates.
To a Confederate, army, and the Confederates are kind of saying like, oh, look at what the government feeds us, like it's corn cobs. We don't get like welcome to this, wonderful summer home here where you're gonna stay and have delicious food, and he's being sarcastic, and the conditions are really poor for the soldiers. So there's like these weird little hints at politics and the war going on, but it's very much just kind of in the background, and it's interesting because there's like the chaos of war, and then there's also the chaos of the Wild West, and they're kind of like at odds with each other here. There's a scene where Tuco is making Blondie walk in this part of the desert where the troops don't even want to walk during the war, and it's kind of like this like test of like his will of like, you and I, you know, we're Wild West, we're gonna walk, I'm gonna make you walk in this where like the troops don't even want to walk. And it's sort of interesting because you feel very like there is a little bit of like this isolated feeling out there where it's like, you know, these guys are just of this
it's also a torture scene too. Yeah, like, because you know, it's like, I'm gonna murder you, but first I'm really gonna make you suffer the way that you made me suffer when you betrayed me. And isn't it poetic, you know?
Yeah, and Clint Eastwood's skin is just getting sunburned and gross, and he's so parched, and you know, he's just got like heat stroke, and it's a really tough scene. And you know, but there is like this sense of that whatever's going on in the war is like, it's almost like a little bit of a microcosm what's going on with the other characters, you know, and their silly little battle, you know, when all of this other major stuff is going on outside of them. So it's kind of an interesting setting, you know, it's kind of incidental to it.
Another thing that really struck me watching it growing up was just the look of the film, the cinematography, you know, the fact that it's like, you know, it's this beautiful widescreen, but they didn't do that with like anamorphic lenses. They did it by just fitting more frames onto the film, so it's actually like softer and grainier than a typical film, while also giving you that kind of wide expanse, and everything about it just feels so dirty.
Yeah.
Except everybody's teeth. Everybody's got perfectly white teeth and just like the most grimy, awful skin and hair.
Yeah, I mean, you really get that setting. It feels, you know, there's mud and there's dust and sand and desert. Like you get all of the things, and there's sunburn, and their lips are all like gross and parched, and just you really get that grossness, you know, that feeling of it. Yeah, I think that I think it looks really good. You know, I think it's definitely an interesting look. The graininess of it, it gives it like a little bit of, it's funny because you brought up the cheapness. And I think for me, the thing that I feel takes me a little bit out of it, and this is just a personal thing, is the dubbing. I really dislike dubbing in movies. It always takes me out of it. This one isn't too bad, except for those scenes that they inserted for the extended edition.
Yeah, this is the 2000s DVD release. That's where they added additional scenes back in that were never dubbed in English. So, you know, you get like 60-year-old Eli Wallach and Clint Eastwood dubbing their roles, and they don't sound like the same people anymore.
Yeah.
And it stands out. It and I don't think don't get the sense that they even had like as much resources to really blend it in as well as the previous ones, because actually the sound editing in this, you know, we talked about the dubbing, but like there's very little dialogue in the movie to begin with, and all of like the audio textures of it, you know, do such a good job of making you feel the space of this desert and all of the little details. You know, when he hears the spurs of the bandits coming in to kill him, when the and how it's like covered up by the marching of the army until it stops. Everything just kind of works together so well, and you could tell that like Sergio Leone and Ennio Morricone and the cast, that they all really, they're just at the top of their game, and they understand how to make a compelling cinematic experience.
Yeah. And surprisingly funny too. There's a lot of like little bits of like, not funny, but you know, it's like when Blondie is like shooting the hats off the guys, and the hats are kind of going whoosh whoosh, like you can kind of like hear, you know, there's just kind of like a lot of silliness in this movie too, where it's like so over the top sometimes, where it's just, you know, it's just kind of fun to watch.
I love how every gunshot has a ricochet sound afterward, you know, for no reason, but it sounds right.
Yeah. I also really love the scene where Tuco is in the gun shop, because it's just like he just walks in, he's pretty much just, you know, the shop owner knows what's going on, and it's like Tuco's, you know, he's really creepy in this scene, I think, you know, and you're kind of worried for the shop owner, but the shop owner's just like, yeah, whatever you want, absolutely. Oh, in fact, I'm gonna pay you to take the gun. You don't need to pay me. How much do you want? 50? No, 100? 200?
How much? $100. $200. It's all I've got.
Like, it's just so silly. It just escalates.
Yeah.
And just really fun. The acting, I think, is just it's really good. It's which we should talk a little bit about the casting choices.
Yeah, that was I was kind of ready to lead into that because we were talking about Tuco and we were talking about how creepy he is. Tuco is a Mexican character and Eli Wallach is not a Mexican actor. And I don't know whether that was like brown face or if he just tanned or what's going on there, but I'm not aware of any like real controversy around the casting of this film. I don't feel qualified to be the first one to bring it up, but I couldn't find anything on it. So
yeah, it's interesting because it was so commonplace, during that time to just kind of cast the big stars at the time or, whoever, it was just such a common thing. But I don't get the sense that he was necessarily doing like a brown face or anything, but
literal brown face, whether he
that's
literally darkened his
skin.
Exactly,
that's what I'm referring to. But he certainly is not Mexican. So it's it's like, yes, it's a product of its time. It's one of those situations.
I also think that sometimes, like, I wonder if it might be a thing where it's like, I hate when they cast cis actors to play trans roles, except David Duchovny in Twin Peaks because he does such a good job. I don't know that Tuco's necessarily bringing a lot of humanity to the role in the way that Duchovny did, but I think that he's not just a menace. He's not just he's not just like a clown.
Right.
There are elements of both, but underneath it all is also he's really competent. He goes into that gun store.
Oh, yeah.
Takes the guns apart. First of all, immediately like recognizes the guns that the guy's trying to sell him are not good guns and goes for the good stuff. Takes them apart and builds his own gun out of them right in front of the guy. He gets the better of Blondie kind of again and again, despite the fact that Blondie is really presented as the more, he's the white knight,
Yeah, which is something I think that also I tend to not like Westerns for, is because I feel like they generally place the white guy as this hero, the knight in shining armor. And I mean, again, we talked about this movie is the good, and the good is the white guy. It's kind of questionable.
The whitest white guy, the white guy who wears white and who is named for having blonde hair, even though he doesn't. I don't know.
And he does some cool stuff. Like, he's got some skills with his gun, but I think so far where we're at in the movie, Tuco is the smarter kind of criminal. He's a smarter outlaw. Interested to see where it's going to go.
He's louder, though. He wears his heart on his sleeve, whereas Clint Eastwood is kind of like the sort of stoic character.
He's very cool, and, Tuco is kind of unhinged.
But even then, like, you can't make a film set in the Civil War without race playing a big element to it. And obviously, like, you brought up during the film where all of the targets that Tuco's shooting at the gun shop, they're all indigenous people.
Yeah.
This is like... It's under the looming presence of manifest destiny and slavery that can't help coming through. I don't think they were trying to make a film that incorporates this stuff in any sort of thoughtful way, but it can't help being there just by virtue of it being a Western and by virtue of it being the Civil War. Yeah,
exactly. And I'm not super well versed in what was going on in that part of the country during the Civil War, but it's interesting that that's where it's set, because it doesn't seem like there's a lot of defined politics right then, as far as like allegiance to one side or the other. I don't know if you know anything more about that.
I do know. My understanding is that like the colonel and the general that they are based on like real regiments. I don't know if they went out like so far into the Southwest that they were going through desert. I think it was more so like Oklahoma and Texas kind of area. But they were out in the territories. Sure. My understanding is that Leone was really interested in Civil War history and was interested in American history, but also because the setting is just so outlandish and abstract by not even being filmed in the US, it can't help but have this, like, it's almost like a cartoon version of it. And a lot of times that's something that, like, as I get older, doesn't land with me, because I feel like films are more inspired by other films than about their actual subject matter. And this has that, but it owns it in an interesting way.
Yeah, I think it works. I think that, you know, all the things you're talking about, I think it does work for this movie. But yeah, certainly it's also just a really interesting choice to even bring in the Civil War. Like, you know, we could have just had this movie without that, but bringing it in does add like another dimension to it that I think you sort of have to talk about racial politics during what this, you know, during this time, and like what's going on, and also how it's depicted in the 60s, you know, that, you know, that Westerns in the 60s, it's a kind of an interesting thing, and how Westerns have been historically, especially during the studio system, how Westerns are portrayed, and how, you know, Indigenous people are portrayed in Westerns. Like, there's a long history there that, you know, this is in 1966, so not exactly like early, you know, not early studio system time, and this is certainly
this was around probably the time that the studio system was collapsing in the US,
so,
and they were kind of trying to figure out, like, oh, what's next? And, you know, right before you started getting the Scorseses and the Spielbergs and the Coppolas, you know, sort of being that new Hollywood.
Yeah, and, you know, I think a reason why I never was super interested in watching like these kind of Clint Eastwood movies is because I always thought it had a very specific perspective, which is that of the studio system Westerns. I don't think that this exactly does, but I certainly see elements of that, you know, in just because it's a Western, you know, because it does still kind of adhere, you know, a Western set during this time is going to just naturally have these kind of themes come up.
Yeah, and there is sort of an element, you know, we talked a lot in Saving Private Ryan about, you know, that old Truffaut axiom that you can't have an anti-war film. And I certainly don't want to go too far in saying that this is a film that's going to be like truly anti-war. But I do think that sort of to the extent that the characters have any sort of emotional reaction to the war that's happening around them, it's mostly like kind of rolling their eyes at, you know, what a waste of life this is.
Yeah, it's looking at it through, because anytime you get anything about the war, when characters are actually interacting with something that's going on or just talking about it, it's always negative. So I don't know that it's necessarily like, I don't think it's inherently an anti-war movie. I don't think it's really making a big statement on war in general, but it's definitely there. And it's interesting because I think we were talking a little bit about, I was asking you what Clint Eastwood's politics are, and I think you said he's like very right-wing.
Yeah, he's right-wing, but he's also kind of his own brand of right-wing, where like he is also like, you know, self-proclaimed polyamorous, while also, from what I understand, having very problematic relationships. I think that one of the reasons that because like his early films were films like this, they were foreign films, and, you know, basically after he made a Western musical called Paint Your Wagon, I think it was a Be Kind Rewind video that we saw about this, or it might have been a Karina Longworth podcast. But my understanding is that after Paint Your Wagon had got such terrible reviews and had such a huge backlash, that he kind of solidified himself into more of a macho kind of right-wing public persona. And you watch a lot of films of his, and so much of it seems to be about questioning that sort of classic Hollywood simplistic heroism of the Western archetypes and hero archetypes. And when you see, because he has been a politician, Most recent thing that I remember him for is in the 2012 elections when he gave a speech to the RNC, and it was a horribly incoherent speech to an empty chair where he pretended Obama was sitting there, and it was like, wow, this is really bad and awkward.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. And also, this movie was not one that he directed. This is a Sergio Leone movie. So also we're getting this from someone who is European, who is Italian, it's interesting.
And his main influence was probably samurai films from Akira Kurosawa. He actually, the 3 Westerns that he made with Clint Eastwood are often called the Man with No Name trilogy. Fistful of Dollars, For a Few Dollars More, and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And people say that, like, oh, it's the same character and he's got no name. Well, in every one of the films, he has a name.
Yeah.
And in the second one, it's like very explicit. Oh, this is my name. It's like there's no indication that he's using an alias. Huh. And I went to a Q&A, I think it was for A Fistful of Dollars, and I actually got to ask him about this. Mm-hmm. And he basically said that he was playing a different character in each film.
Yeah.
I don't remember if he actually answered the question of, like, do the characters, are these their names that they're referred to in the film? But during that same Q&A, he basically tried to kind of take credit for Leone's direction in the films, where he was like, originally A Fistful of Dollars was going to be, was going to be a lot of talking. And I was like, well, that's not very Hollywood, is it? And, and I'm like, okay, well, maybe not. I don't know,
These Hollywood guys love to tell their stories.
Yeah,
but...
it was all my idea.
Yeah. But, it's interesting, and it's interesting how he sort of, became his own, director and filmmaker in his own right. And you mentioned the influence on Quentin Tarantino, and I think I can really see a through line, through a lot of his movies. Definitely The Hateful Eight.
He kept using all the score from this. The Hateful Eight, I think, is the only one that has an original score. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's not entirely true, but that's one of the only ones with an original score, and it's by Ennio Morricone.
Yeah, and certainly, a lot of elements of Kill Bill, even though they're not westerns, I think that they do have a lot of similarities, in themes. There's a lot of, like the revenge theme and these kind of things.
And the settings. There's Kill Bill Volume 2 is a western.
Yeah. So definitely can see, the through lines there. And it's always interesting to me to go back, with like Tarantino, and so many of those movies were so influential in, when I was sort of really getting into movies. And now to go back, because I don't really connect with Tarantino so much, but now going back and connecting with the movies that influenced his movies, and I'm like, oh yeah, this is the movie. It's like this is the kind of stuff that I can really appreciate now. And I'm glad that I've I feel like I've been branching out a bit the last few years, where it's like, I would never watch a Western, or maybe I would never watch a fantasy movie or whatever. And now I'm letting myself branch out a little bit, because I think, like, there are some movies like this, I couldn't believe how many of the themes in this movie are themes that I, like to revisit in a lot of my other, movies. Like, again, drawing the parallels between like gangster movies and, that I think it's like, it's cool. It's cool to branch out a little bit.
And also, we just watched the Lestat finale, like there's a bit of connection there, where it's again, part of the fun is watching these characters who have no scruples about anything. They're not held back by any sort of morality.
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting to see how they navigate social situations under those circumstances.
Yeah. And that's one of my favorite things. And we were talking about this, is just watch characters who just do not, they just give in to that hedonism. They just do what they want. And, what does that like? What are the consequences? How are they playing off the other characters? And, I think this movie has that definitely, they're each trying to outwit the other, and it's just a really, it's just really fun to watch. I think it's just a really entertaining and kind of just cool movie, really.
I'm very excited to watch the second half with you. We can't make a ruling on it yet, but I also, after this conversation, I would be really curious to go back and watch some of the older Westerns, the ones that I still connect with, the John Fords, from The Searchers to The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, the ones that sort of are a little bit later, beyond, after, sort of like the flood of Westerns kind of ran its course a little bit, and start to kind of question, what the Westerns' values really are and what we can learn from them, and where they get it wrong. And The Searchers is one that is in our collection, and I think that might be a future one that you end up having to pick eventually. I'd be really curious to watch that one with you, and maybe to bring in one of my dad's favorite films, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, which would also be, I think, a really interesting discussion about Western mythology.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there for sure, and I'm sure we'll be unpacking much more in our second episode, the finale of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. So we will be talking about that next time on DVD Clutter.
The reason, the goal.